Okay, Devil's Club. This is prime area in the northwest of North America, and we are in a national park which is a prime location for the Devil's Club. Oplapanax horridus. The horridus again getting the name from the spines on the Devil's Club, I believe, which are what inflict the pain. The Devil's Club, Oplapanax horridus, is horrible as the name suggests, and the stick right now is still a spiked walking stick, and there's only a bud on the top of it. This is April the 15th, tax day in the US, and everything is still dormant out here in the national park in northwest North America. We're actually in British Columbia, and the growth has not started. The deciduous plants are still in dormant or early budding stages. That includes the Devil's Walking Stick or the Devil's Club. Okay, Devil's Club. This is prime area in the northwest of North America, and we are in a national park which is a prime location for the Devil's Club. Oplapanax horridus. The horridus again getting the name from the spines on the Devil's Club, I believe, which are what inflict the pain. Here we are in good Devil's Club territory. This happens to be a blueberry patch, but it used to be a bog where Devil's Club would grow. This used to be all forested before the farming took over. It's still, or just started to be spring a week ago, but the buds are not out on the Devil's Club yet. I just checked up at my stand today, and they are not quite yet budding. Thank you. Here I am on the bank of Gold Creek. And if you're wondering if it's full of gold, I haven't found any yet. So, anyway, the Devil's Club is covered in spines. That's why it's called the Devil's Club. It's spiny. It's also why the species name is horridus. I think there are some other species that are horridus, such as the grizzly bear, and I believe one of the really terrible dinosaurs was also a horridus. But anyway, Devil's Club the species name is horridus. Oplapanax is the genus name. So Oplapanax horridus. And covered in spines everywhere except the flowers, the fruit, and the roots. Now the roots are a rhizome, so that is kind of like a ginger root, if you know what that's like. That's a rhizome, and the plant grows every year and can divide and grow new plants from the rhizome. Or if the rhizome is broken up, then each piece of the rhizome will create a new plant. So the rhizome is edible, apparently, especially if cooked. I wouldn't tend to eat it raw, and I would start with just a small amount. But that's also what medications are made of, and that's where the more than 100 chemicals that have been isolated from the Devil's Club plant, they usually come from the rhizome, the root. Again, the rhizome has no spines, so it is not part of the horrible spiny processes of the Devil's Club. The people who used to use Devil's Club for medications would often take the root, grind it up, sometimes the bark. Oh, mosquitoes are coming out. Sometimes the bark, grind it up, and produce salves and ointments, and add them to bandages for wounds, things like that. So apparently they work. There have been no blinded, double-blind, controlled studies of the medical aspects of the indigenous uses of the Devil's Club. But I'm sure these will be done at some time in the future. They do need to be done, but usually will take some time. Okay, here we are at Gold Creek. We'll move on to our next location. Devil's Club, also known as the Devil's Walking Stick. And even way out here you get cars going by. But anyway, and a plane just went over. But this is the middle of the national forest. So people are on their COVID vacation. Now, there have been over 100 chemicals that I can see that have been isolated from the Devil's Club. And many of these are being investigated. These are unique chemicals. Okay, the Devil's Club is covered in spines except for the root, berries, and flowers. And again, the root is the rhizome. It is rather large and probably edible, or a lot of people do eat it and use it for medication. And that's where many of the medicines come from, the root and the bark. The dangerous part of it is the spines. There's spines all over, and again they're quite long, they're very brittle and hard. They do break off if you brush against them, and then do need to be surgically removed, usually. So, avoid touching or brushing against the Devil's Club. Can be very painful. Each chemical has to be isolated individually and tested in clinical studies to see if it is medicinal. Again, has been used by the indigenous peoples for millennia, probably 20-25,000 years in this area. The indigenous people have used these as medications. These medications have been used for numerous purposes, including salves, ointments for treating rashes. It's also been used for treating anorexia, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. It's also been used for pain management as an analgesic, and for diabetes, for blood sugar control. It is apparently very useful. Further studies are required on these chemicals. Again, there are approximately 100 that have been identified so far that I could see, but each needs to be investigated individually. The sesquiterpenoids, there are numerous unique sesquiterpenoids in the Devil's Club, and they've been isolated and have been turned into commercially available medications. Horsefly. Commercially available medications, especially for cancer chemotherapy. Now, interestingly, they do work. They do inhibit cell growth, and especially the cancer cells, so they were successful in treatment of various types of cancer. But a problem was the high incidence of side effects. Now these side effects mainly are due to the inhibition of cell growth, so that would affect tissues that have a high growth rate, such as the gastrointestinal tract, and so that the major symptoms are anorexia, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea, as you would expect. It can also suppress the white blood cell counts because those are rapidly dividing tissues, and thus can suppress the immune system and lead to secondary infections. Again, the sesquiterpenoids, some of the chemicals that are found in the Devil's Club, have been marketed commercially as anti-cancer chemotherapeutic agents. One of the controlling factors was side effects, which are significant with chemotherapeutic agents for the treatment of cancer and often limit the available treatment modes for cancer chemotherapy. Now, it may also be said that if you don't have a reaction to the treatment, then the treatment probably is not working effectively. I mean, consider for the flu vaccine, if you get a bad reaction, feel like you have the flu, then you know your body's actually responded to it and it is probably going to work. Also, if you get a bad reaction to the COVID-19 vaccine, you probably know that it is working. Your immune system's responding, and you're probably going to be vaccinated and immune once it's over. Devil's Club for cancer chemotherapy. Again, Devil's Club chemicals, when isolated and tested, have been very successful for cancer chemotherapy. And this includes pancreatic cancer, ovarian cancer, cancer of the bowel, breast cancer, and leukemia, amongst others. The limiting factor appears to be the side effects, including anorexia, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. But as far as I know, every successful chemotherapy does have side effects, but apparently these are the limiting factor in Devil's Club chemotherapy. Yes. Okay, more study is required, obviously. Double-blind controlled, placebo-controlled studies reviewed by peer review in medical literature. That's usually what's required. Thank you. Devil's Club and eye injuries. Eye injuries can be very serious and usually are if you run into Devil's Club, especially with your eye. The spines go right into your eye, right through your eye, if deep enough, and usually requires surgery. So wear glasses or goggles if you're near Devil's Club. Otherwise, stay away from it and avoid the need for eye surgery. It's got me anxious. A needle in the eye. That sounds painful. And it is very painful. Several people in the medical literature have lost their eye due to Devil's Club spines. So be careful. And here is Gold Creek, the homeland of Devil's Club. Those are real birds, by the way. Okay, Devil's Club. Again, the dangerous part is the spines, not particularly poisonous for ingestion. The spines are not toxic or poisonous themselves, but do cause physical injury. The injury is purely physical, and but dangerous because they are quite long spines. They are very sharp, they're very strong, but they are brittle. And so when you brush against them, they can break off into your skin, and there may be hundreds or more embedded into your skin and quite deep, and they do break off, and usually they're below the skin, and so you require surgical removal with at least tweezers and sometimes maybe a scalpel, maybe an anesthetic, and maybe hospital or emergency department treatment. But again, that's a big problem, and that's why they're called horridus. Horrible that they stick spines in you, kind of like a porcupine, if you can imagine that. Anyway, this is an area where there's a lot of Devil's Club, and it's April 15th, 2021, and we're right in the middle of COVID season, which has been going on for almost a year and a half now. So the Devil's Club has not bloomed yet, it's just getting buds on the top, but I will show you pictures when it's in full bloom and then full leaf. The plant is deciduous, so it does go dormant in the winter, leaving, as I showed you, just a devil's walking stick, which is one stick sticking out of the ground, which can be many, many feet high, actually. They stayed up to 15 feet, but covered with thorns. So beware. Devil's Club, Oplapanax horridus. The horrible stick of the devil's walking stick. So that's due to the long, dangerous spines all over the plant except for, again, the root, the tuber, the leaves have spines, but the flowers and the berries do not. And so some people will cook those and eat those. Some people will make medications out of the berries, and some people make dyes, especially the indigenous people make dyes out of the berries because they are bright red. Now I do note that normally bright red berries should not be eaten, especially in this area in Canada. Usually bright red berries are poisonous, but in the case of Devil's Club, they are not so much so. They are mildly poisonous if you eat too many, and if they're raw especially. So if you're going to eat them, please cook them, and please start with a small amount so you don't get sick. The big symptom is tightening of the throat, hoarseness, anorexia, nausea, and vomiting, and diarrhea. Now these occur because of the formation of oxalic acid in the plant. And again, oxalic acid is seen in skunk cabbage, in Dieffenbachia, and plants like that. Rhubarb leaves also have large amounts of oxalic acid, and that's why Dieffenbachia is called the dumb cane, or the mother-in-law's plant, because if you eat it, you can go hoarse and be unable to speak, but it can also cause throat and airway constriction if too much is taken, so not a good idea to eat that. Again, the same thing with Devil's Club. If you eat too much, you're going to possibly develop those symptoms. Again, oxalic acid is heat labile, that is, you can cook the oxalic acid and decompose it, so it's no longer poisonous. But oxalic acid is basically in the classification of a toxin, so it's a phytotoxin that is produced and ingested through plants. Here I am going for a hike on one of the many trails in this park, and I'm here to show you a prime area for the growth of Devil's Club. Oplapanax horridus, and the name horridus, I believe, comes from the fact that the plant is covered in spines, and that is the dangerous part of the plant and the injurious part of the plant, because the plant itself is not overly toxic unless you eat too much of it, and especially raw, which can lead to anorexia, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Okay, there behind me is the stand of Devil's Club, right at the park entrance, a whole stand of them. And you can see the fresh buds on top. Those are ready to eat, but this is a national park. They cannot be picked, so just enjoy looking at them. Here's another nice bud right there. The car just went by. You can see how close the road is. Probably 20 feet from the road. Nice bud. Beautiful bud. That is delicious, ready to eat right now. April 17th, 2021. There's another car. See how close it is? The stand is right beside the road with a whole bunch of beautiful buds. Okay, here we are in the spring, and there's a nice Devil's Club bud right on the end there, right on the end of the devil's walking stick. Very nice. It's the middle of April here, and that's a very nice bud. Okay, the Devil's Club has bloomed out. With the new buds have broken into nice leaf structures on the top of each devil's walking stick. As you can see there, and the structure, it's already got covered in thorns. And down the shaft of the devil's walking stick. There's a nice one there. A whole grove of them here. Get a little close up. Covered in spines, and the back of the leaves are covered in spines too.